Bike on Nottingham is brought to you in conjunction with the Nottingham Imperial Building Society.
Hello, my name's Andrew David. The city of Nottingham has a long and glorious heritage which is well documented and recorded. This video doesn't attempt to be a history of the city, but is a selection of old film clips from widely differing sources and is a reflection of some of the events and long-forgotten images as seen through the eyes of local filmmakers. If there's been original soundtrack on the film, this has been preserved to reflect the thoughts of the people at the time. I hope that you enjoy it now as much as they did.
The old market square is an open space of 5 1/4 acres in the middle of Nottingham, where for centuries the market and goose fair were held. It seems to have been the same size and the same peculiar leg of mutton shape from nearly Norman times, when a central wall divided the English and French halves. The open market was, in 1928, thought to be one of the largest in the country. But after that year, the market and goose fair were removed to other sites and replaced by a paved open space with a broad processional way running down the middle, practically along the site of the old dividing wall. From 4:30, when the first morning light is filtering into the square, buses arrive with the earliest of the workers. Those for whom the day begins while most other people are still asleep and some of the travellers themselves are hardly awake. Those who have worked throughout the night are already in the square, waiting to be taken home. Most of these early travellers catch the same bus and travel with the same companions every morning. They are familiar, at least by sight, to each other, as familiar as the news vendors who arrive just after 6 with papers to be read at work or on the way home. Familiar too is the postman, starting on his round of the business houses. And even more familiar are the many people whose job it is to clean, scrub and polish away all traces of yesterday before the sun climbs above the dome of the council house to flood the square with light. The early morning queue for nylons is a new feature, but it too is rapidly becoming familiar. At 7:45, the first chimes of the day are heard from the council house clock, which has been silent all night. At 7:45 too, the transport canteen arrives, and the bus crews, conscious of having set the wheels of the city turning, can relax and refresh themselves before going back to deal with the growing tide of passengers. For the buses continue to bring in load after load. But now, instead of miners and railwaymen, engineers and mechanics, they bring shop assistants and office workers, until, as Little John strikes 9, the businessmen hurrying to their offices mark the end of the first wave, except for those who left it a little too late. The square is now given over to the business of the day, and the flow of people, though now less urgent than earlier, is nonetheless steady. There are many men among the crowds, but it is of course chiefly the women who pause before the windows to discuss the displays, to choose a purchase, or just to admire. And although children like the square, the crowded pavements are not much fun. Nearly all the buildings overhang the bottom story and are supported by pillars forming long piazzas. There are many theories about the origins of these traditional architectural features, none of them entirely convincing. It is certain, however, that they are not now likely to disappear whatever changes may take place in the buildings they support. Apart from those who come to shop, there is all day and every day a ceaseless flow of traffic and people through and around the square. For much of the business of Nottingham is conducted within easy reach of the city centre. Over 400 years ago, in the time of Henry VIII, the historian Leland wrote of Nottingham Marketplace, both for the buildings on the side of it, for the very great wideness of the streets, and the clean paving of it. It is the fairest without exception in all England. As the afternoon wears on, the crowds grow thicker and slow down into queues. The workers from factories, offices and shops have begun to make their way home again. Between 5 and 6 o'clock each evening, over 25,000 passengers are transported from the square to Mapperley, Beeston, Basford and Carlton, to Lenton, Radford, Snainton and Arnold, to Trent Bridge and West Bridgeford, to Dunkirk and Hyson Green and all the other thickly populated districts of Nottingham and its suburbs, which even at the beginning of the last century were country villages, sending produce and not people to this marketplace. But the old market square is more than just a bus terminus. It has a life and many-sided character of its own. Designed with low walls and formal flower beds as a worthy frontage to the council house, it is a favorite resort of many people who come here not to go on to somewhere else, but to sit, to gossip. To study their fellows, or to remember old times. Times when this really was a marketplace, when within its 5 1/4 acres were sold pots and poultry, boots and butter, cloth and corn cures. Times when the square and the neighbouring streets were filled with the booths and roundabouts of the great goose fair. But the real inhabitants of the square are the pigeons. Officially frowned upon, they are great favourites with Nottingham people, many of whom make a special point of feeding them.
The Goose Fair has long been a highlight in the Nottingham calendar, with its roots dating back to at least 1284. Legend has it that the name came from the huge flocks of geese driven up in their thousands from the fens of East Anglia for sale at the produce and livestock market held in the market square. A common feature in the 1920s were wild animals, these days only to be seen in zoos. And here a young boy experiences firsthand feeding a bear cub. The beginning of the 1800s saw sideshows begin to join trade stalls, and Wombwell's Wild Beast Show made its first of over 100 visits to the Goose Fair in 1805. The Goose Fair was held in the Market Square until 1927, and despite 12,000 people attending a public protest meeting the Sunday before the last fair, it was moved to the Forest site along Gregory Boulevard in 1928. The changing face of the Goose Fair had started. However, magistrates banned merry-go-rounds in 1813, describing them as disgraceful and dangerous machines. Since then, many newcomers arrived, including a hand-turned roundabout in 1855 and dodgems in 1929. The showmen, vaudeville acts, rides and sideshows had arrived and are recognisable as the forerunners of today's Goose Fair attractions. In the 1960s, the Goose Fair continued to attract fairmen from the length and breadth of the country, with the attractions looking more like the modern fairs of today, with high-powered rides, merry-go-rounds and dodgem cars. Such is the magnetism of the Goose Fair that crowds are attracted to watch with anticipation the giant rides and sideshows being constructed as the show is got ready. On the first day, the Goose Fair is officially opened at noon. The Chief Executive and Town Clerk read the proclamation in the presence of the Sheriff of Nottingham and other civic dignitaries. The Lord Mayor then rings a pair of silver bells to signify that the fair is open. Very few years appear to have missed a Goose Fair. However, the plague in 1646 and the two world wars forced the fair to be cancelled. However, in the 3 successive years to 1945, a Whitsuntide fair was held on the Forest site. Many of the attractions seen here in the 1960s feature the showmen who started around the turn of the century and are still providing enjoyment for all the family at the Goose Fairs of today. People still fish for plastic ducks, although the prices and safety standards are a little higher at today's fair. A visit to the fair isn't complete without toffee apples, candy floss and coconut shies. The people of Nottingham need little excuse for getting into a celebratory mood. Over the past century, Nottingham has taken full advantage of celebrating royal occasions. 1936 saw the proclamation of King Edward VIII. Judging by the size of the crowds squeezing into every available corner, it was a joyous occasion. King Edward VIII was popular with the people of Nottingham, especially since becoming the owner of Grove Farm at Lenton. Although his visits were mostly of a private nature, he was sometimes to be seen at the more formal functions in the city, giving him a special place in the heart of the people of Nottingham. Even though King Edward's reign was short due to his abdication, King George VI was given an electric welcome for his coronation by the city of Nottingham. Trams, floodlit buildings and fireworks lit up the dark skies for the crowds that came out, braving the wet weather. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953 lifted the spirits of the entire country after the years of post-war rationing. Everyone was so proud of their young queen taking on such an immense role as head of the Commonwealth. Once again, the city of Nottingham rose to the occasion of celebrating the coronation of another monarch. Most of the streets in and around the Nottingham area were decked out with banners and bunting, many of which were homemade. It seemed that everywhere you went, there were banners and decorations. It wasn't only people at home that were in a rejoicing mood. Many factories and offices also entered into the spirit of the celebrations. Shop fronts and windows were bursting with royal regalia. Buntings, crowns, flags were strewn throughout the streets of Nottingham, with the Council House and Old Market Square becoming the hub of the celebration decorations. On the 1st of June, the eve of the coronation, the youth of Nottingham staged their own event in celebration of the new Queen. Floats of many shapes and sizes gathered in the forest, together with local marching bands, before making their way along the city streets of Nottingham. Throughout the lead-up to the coronation on June 2nd, 1953, many formal events were staged. Here we see a civic service held at St Mary's Church. It was attended by many local dignitaries, including the Chief Constable, the Sheriff and the Lord Mayor, as well as the aldermen and other council members. Many local residents also attended the service. On Coronation Day, crowds gathered to watch the South Nottingham Hussars send a gun-fired salute to the Queen on Castle Green. Afterwards, there was the usual inspection by the Lord Mayor. For the children of Nottingham, it was an occasion of great merriment. Many events were organised to entertain the children. These included coronation reenactments and fancy dress parades for all age groups. They were followed by the well-deserved tea parties. It wasn't only the children who enjoyed themselves. A number of children were presented with commemoration gifts, including mugs and Nottingham lace. During the afternoon and evening of Coronation Day, the festivities moved into Woollerton Park. A fairground had been set up for children with merry-go-rounds and sideshows. The Nottingham Round Table organised a balloon race. The Old Time Cinema showed films starring Lupino Lane, Charlie Chaplin and Felix the Cat. And despite the windy weather, a truly memorable day was had by all. Before the days of television advertising, a TV advert in 1944 could have looked like this. Having problems with the car? Better take a look inside. Careful, don't touch that engine, it's hot. Looks like a job for the professionals. Time to ring the experts, Trumans of Nottingham, the automobile engineers. That didn't take too long. Needs to go to the garage to have a proper look. Take up the slack and away we go. Easy does it. Need to take a look underneath. Aha, looks like I found the problem. What do you think, boss? What you need is a Fram filter. A turn of the nut, and away we go. A job well done. Another satisfied customer. Now that's what I call service. Come to Truman's, where you'll be well looked after. Inventing new motor contraptions to cut down on petrol costs hasn't been confined to Clive Sinclair and his C5. Riley, the renowned motorbike and car manufacturer, had such ideas back in the 40s. This tandem motor tricycle failed to catch on, despite the thrills of open-air motoring. It looked at its best when parked at the curb. On the 27th of July 1929, the new municipal aerodrome at Tollerton was opened. Regarded as one of the finest landing grounds in the country, it was the scene of many pre-war air pageants enjoyed by thousands. The Lord Mayor, Alderman Atke, is seen boarding a plane at Hucknall Aerodrome, where he took a flight to Stag Lane Aerodrome in London, where he was to receive the licence for Tollerton from the Secretary of State for Air.